Hi there and welcome back. You're with Terry from Bonsai Tree, and today I'm going to be working on this very large collected wild olive. I have featured this tree in previous videos and I'm going to link to that video on my channel now. If you find the following content helpful, then you can thank me by clicking the thanks button just below the video. I've had this tree for about 6 years after I purchased it from a local bonsai enthusiast. Over that period of time, I've been developing the structural branches to the girth that I needed them to be. The design of the tree, as I see its future to be, has changed somewhat drastically from the original vision that the person who collected the tree had for it. Deadwood and wild olives, at least in South Africa, is very common. The reason for this is that many times when these trees are collected, there are several limbs that are not of any use very often for the design of the tree as a bonsai. This tree is no exception to that, and there are several very attractive deadwood features to it. Some of these are new and some of them I created, and over time, as you can see, as they mature, they develop a unique characteristic which is very attractive. But let's get stuck in with the work that needs to be done today, and the first thing that you need to do is remove all these suckers from lower down on the trunk, which steal away energy from the rest of the tree. I like to use a knob cutter for this work, as it leaves me with an indented cut instead of an overt or a stub that would remain. Alternatively, you can use a concave branch cutter, which essentially is a combination between a traditional or standard branch cutter and a knob cutter combined, which will give you the same kind of cut. So I'm just going to proceed around the base of the tree and remove any of the sucker growth, which would, as I said, remove or steal away energy from the rest of the tree. And it is very normal or very common for these trees, these wild olives, to produce this growth. And so this is a step or a maintenance task that needs to be performed quite frequently throughout the growing season. As part of today's scope of work will also be to apply wire and to give the branches some shape, I'm going to have to remove all these leaves which are really obscuring the view of the branches, or it's going to make for a very difficult and very tedious wiring project. Most likely the best and safest way to remove all the leaves will be to use a pair of trimming scissors, alternatively some defoliation shears. However, in the interests of time, and specifically saving time, I'm going to be using my fingertips. In my experience, there isn't really a risk to pulling the leaves off and damaging the buds below them if you, or provided you do remove the leaves forward, in other words, away from the bud, and so the bud remains intact on the branch. Whilst going through the tree and removing the leaves, you can also remove branchlets that are obviously not going to be able to contribute to the structure if you want to do it at this point in time, or alternatively you can remove all the leaves first and then go through and select the branches. As you go through the tree removing the leaves, the structure that was hidden by the leaves is now revealed. In my view, this is when the true nature or expertise of the artist that created the tree is revealed, because nothing can be hidden any longer by the leaves. I've now removed all the leaves from the tree. It's not really necessary to remove the leaves from the longest branches, because most likely those are going to be cut in any way and would just really be a waste of time to spend on defoliating them as well. Now I'm going to do a little bit of carving on the deadwood that is already there, and for that I'm going to be using a nibbler with the T-shaped bit, and in this particular case I'm using the mini T fitted to a flexible shaft on a Dremel. I prefer to be somewhat systematic in my approach to carving. In other words, I don't wish to do all the carving in one sitting. I like to do some carving and then allow time to reveal the grain and the splitting of the wood, and then enhance that further again in the next sitting. And so before I apply any wire, which would get in the way of the carving bits and perhaps cause some damage, I'm now going to use a carving bit to enhance the deadwood that is already there. I removed a rather sizable branch a couple of years ago, and then I did some basic carving initially, but now I want to work this a little bit more. This hollow that was created in that initial carving is a place that water can become trapped in, and obviously I need to do something about that to allow the water out. So I'm now going to use the carving bit to create some interest at the edges of this deadwood feature, and then also remove some of the material below to allow water that does get in through watering or rain to escape. It's always advisable to wear the appropriate safety gear when you're working with these carving bits, and also try to work with the grain so that the bit doesn't bounce. After having completed the carving work that I wanted to do, I'm going to go through the branches and remove the stems or the shoots that I don't want to use. Examples of branches that are not going to be usable are those that grow directly up, those that grow directly down, and those that grow on the inside of curves. This branch, although a very nice branch, very vigorous and healthy, is not going to be usable because it's growing too much at a vertical angle, and if I do apply wire to it, it's going to bend or create a very odd looking rounded shape. This process or procedure of going through the tree and eliminating unwanted branches is very important, as it's going to save you a lot of time when it comes to applying the wire. If you neglect to do or perform this step before you start with wiring, then you're going to be putting your tools down and picking up the tools all the time as you need to, or as you encounter branches that need to be removed. Of course, that doesn't mean to say that as you're wiring and you find branches that you don't want to use in the design of the tree, that you can't cut those. Of course, you can cut those as you're going through the tree, but the bulk of the preparation work is a good idea to complete before you start with wiring. The characteristic growth pattern of olives is where you have buds opposite one another. So in this example, you can see there are two branches that are essentially growing at 180 degrees to one another, and that is not going to be very appealing, and it's not going to be possible to wire both of them to give you a more subtle branch angle. So it's best to actually eliminate the one branch. After working through the entire tree and removing branches that I don't want, which includes branches, as I mentioned, that are growing vertically upwards, branches that are growing downwards, and also branches in the structural, at least the structural portion of the tree, where branches are growing at 180 degrees to one another, to remove the one branch. After this is all completed, I can now proceed to wiring. As the bark of wild olives is very thin, paper thin in fact, I prefer to use aluminium wire, as that does the least amount of damage when applying the wire. I always start with the lowest branches and then I work up into the apex of the tree. When putting bends into the branches, don't forget to put bends in vertically and horizontally so that you have a three-dimensional shape that is inserted or imprinted on the branch. Always make sure to anchor your wire very securely, because any movement in the wire will add to the damage that's done to the bark. I always like to end or terminate the wire at the tips with a slight bend backwards, like a U, or sometimes referred to as a pigtail, as this means that the wire is not going to hook onto your jersey or your shirt, but it's also very practical as well in that it helps you to lift that terminal tip of the branch towards the sunlight, which also aids in its development. When you're coiling wire around the branches, there should always be contact between the wire and the branch, or otherwise the wire is not going to serve any functional purpose. But the angles of the wire as well is determined by the kinds of bends that you're intending to place in the branches. In other words, if you're planning on placing fairly gentle bends in, then the coils of the wire can be further spaced apart. However, if in contrast you want to place very much sharper or exaggerated bends into the branches, then the coils of the wire need to be angled closer together or steeper. It is quite important to also imagine the future of the branch and the size of the bends that you need to place into those branches. So in other words, what I'm saying is that initially when the branch is very thin, the angles or the curves that you put in can look quite exaggerated, but as the branch becomes thicker in girth, those angles or branch bends are going to be a lot more subtle, and so you won't see them as much as you did in the beginning, and so you need to provide for that. Otherwise, eventually the branch is going to look fairly straight. In fact, although initially maybe it had some movement in it. A valuable tip that I would like to share with you is that when you're positioning the branches after applying the wire, I would suggest you look at the tree from the top and also from the sides and not just from the front. because this will assist you in determining or identifying the gaps in the structure. And so you can position branches into those areas so that the tree is uniformly filled. Branches in the lower regions of the tree should be directed in a more or less horizontal fashion, but as you move up into the apex of the tree, the angle should change and become more vertical, because it's obvious that those branches are going to grow more towards the sun. This is not just an aesthetic thing, it's very practical. If you look at trees that are growing in nature, the oldest branches are the ones that are lowest down in the tree, and they need to extend further and further away from the trunk in order to get sunlight, because they become increasingly more shaded by branches above them. And due to the weight that those branches are now subjected to, they will begin to droop. Building the apex or the canopy of the tree is a very important step, and although it's going to be covered in leaves and essentially be seen as almost one unit in the future, you do need to lay the foundation of that. And so when I'm building an apex, I like to use the branches that I have at my disposal at that time and disperse them or space them around to fill the space that is occupied by the apex. And then over time I can fill up the gaps between those branches with further branches that develop from the tree. To neaten up the appearance of the tree, after I've finished wiring and positioning all the branches where I want them to be, I go through and cut back or trim those branches that the tips exceed from the outline or of the canopy that I have in mind. If you found that content helpful and you'd like to thank me for it, please do so now by clicking the thanks button just below the video. Finally, I'm going to go through the tree and just clean it up, all the leaves that have fallen on the surface, as well as do some weeding and just scrape the surface of the soil as well if it has become sort of compacted, as this will promote water penetration as well as oxygenation of the soil. The wild olive as a species for bonsai cultivation is hard to beat. The fact that it is possible to still collect stunning specimens such as this one really makes them a very attractive species to have in all bonsai enthusiasts' collections. There are a few pests and diseases or fungal issues that you might encounter with wild olives, but these are relatively easy to control. It is possible to use a systemic poison like Koh-i-Noor once or twice a season to prevent any existence or proliferation of whitefly, and scale is another problem that can be controlled by that. You can also use something called plant care, and this is also contact and systemic in nature, and this is something that you would apply on a more frequent basis. I like to use it on a monthly basis. A lot of people experience problems with phytophthora or root rot with their olives. However, since converting to a akadama, pumice and lava mix, I never have that problem any longer. I hope that you've enjoyed this video and that you've gained a few tips for cultivating your own bonsai olives. If you haven't done so yet, please do like and subscribe to my channel for more updates on this tree and other projects that I'm busy with.